But first, today, I wonder where in the territory you'd find it most handy to have a flying car. I was thinking maybe just if you live in an area, maybe if you live in Goombulanya, you've got to go across to Kale's Crossing every so often. Be handy to have a flying car there, wouldn't it? If you can think of a better place for a flying car, I would love to hear from you. 1300 057 222. Paint a picture of where you'd take a flying car if you could, or who would perhaps find it most handy. Or you could send a text on 0487 991057 if you like. I mean, we don't have the really choking congestion of the capitals down south where I'm sure people sit and daydream for ages about how they could just wish themselves out of their car flying across the traffic to get to work sooner. Or just have daydreams of the Jetsons. It was all so much easier when we were imagining the future instead of, living in it. Well, the company Uber has just announced an agreement with NASA to build flying taxis for the year 2020. I heard this the other day and I thought, rubbish. That is an announcement for a headline. Yeah, sure, maybe they're working on it, but it can't possibly happen, can it? I'm just such a cynic with this stuff after getting very excited about promised jetpacks about 10 years ago that were only 3 years away. And guess what? They still haven't happened. So are flying cars any different? Shara Evans is a futurist. Am I right to be pessimistic, or should I just leave that aside and imagine a world of flying cars, Shara?
Well, hi, Kate, and hello, everyone. Believe it or not, in January of last year, I saw in person a working prototype of the world's first flying taxi from a company in China. It's called the EHang 184. And in many ways, it looks like one of those flying cars that you might have seen in the Jetson. It fits one passenger, can carry up to about 200 pounds. Sorry, I was born in America, so I still get things in pounds sometimes. And it's able to travel at 100 kilometers per hour. And that was actually real.
Wow.
And,
so that's a big, it wasn't just a drone that was built to look like a car. It wasn't model size. This was a real big size.
Yeah, it was relatively small in terms of a car. I'm trying to think of the kind of car. It would be almost like a Volkswagen Beetle type of size car, because
or those tiny little smart cars.
Yeah. But it was a single person car. And what you may be surprised about is that there are trials happening in New Zealand right now where a company called Kitty Hawk that is owned by Larry Page, a Google co-founder, has done official certification with New Zealand, and they're starting to trial fully electric, self-piloting, completely autonomous flying taxis that look like little planes, but they take off vertically. It's called VTOL, and then they go horizontal like a normal plane does. And it's a very similar design to what Uber is talking about.
So when I think of a flying car, which is what I was picturing with this announcement, I'm thinking about something that could, that has wheels that could drive on a road, but then could take off. Typically in the sci-fi movies, maybe the wheels go sideways and blah, 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 and then it goes up. But the Mickey, the super producer, just put a picture up so I can see what this EHang thing is. And it looks more like a kind of variation on a design of a helicopter, really, than a car.
It certainly does. Now, there's another design that I've seen just in concept, so it's not a real vehicle yet, from Airbus, where they've got, if you like, a car that's a pod that can have a platform underneath that have wheels, and it's, complete autonomous car. But then you drive it to a docking station, and the wheels come off, and clamps come on top of it, and it starts to look more like a helicopter. So it actually is a convertible car, but that's only a concept video so far. And I haven't heard of a date when something like that would be truly available. So I would say that these flying taxis or flying cars in my opinion, look more like little airplanes than they do cars, at least for right now.
You're on ABC Radio Darwin. It's 5:12. Thank you so much to your texter saying, isn't Tales from the Tinny supposed to be on? Yes, it will be. In 18 minutes, you'll be able to get all of the fishing information you could possibly want. And if you have to do something and you're irritated that you can't listen to it right now, you can always subscribe to the podcast too. Then you can listen to it whenever you want. I'm speaking with Shara Evans, who's a futurist. We're talking about how realistic flying cars are really, and the idea of this prototype that could somehow fit into the world as a flying taxi is really interesting, Shara. But I had my soul a little bit crushed by this jetpack story, right, that I did about 10 years ago. A company in New Zealand who, instead of, the traditional jetpack idea with the fire coming out of the backpack, which is not really good if you want to keep the backs of your legs unsinged, right?
Yeah.
But instead of that, they had a design that was more like big bins that you'd strap to your back, but they're kind of turbines, and they just push heaps of air down so that they could, yeah, right. But it worked. So I could see, unless that was very tricky photography, see demos of this kind of air-based jetpack shooting people across paddocks and stuff in New Zealand, and them kind of hovering around, and it looks like it worked. But just because those prototypes worked doesn't mean that we're now all kind of hanging about, flying down to the shops for some bread with jetpacks. So the prototype of the flying taxi is one thing, but when would we even see it? Because logistically, that sounds like a nightmare.
Well, if I look at the trials that are happening in New Zealand in conjunction with the New Zealand government, they're looking at 2020 to actually have an autonomous taxi service.
But that's only a couple of years away now. Has somebody told them that?
I know. It's really, really fast.
Like, it sounds the future. It's like in the year 2000, but actually,
Well, these are still, you have to understand, these are still trials. So I don't think we'll actually see a commercial service in 2020, but I think that we're going to see an extension of trial. There are a lot of things that have to be done before we see this as a commercial service. And one of those would be what I'm calling highways in the sky. You have to actually segment airspace where these aircraft are allowed to go. You can imagine the accidents that could happen when you've got these vehicles flying in 3 dimensions without any sort of traffic infrastructure. And it needs to fit in with the aviation infrastructure for larger planes as well. So there's a lot of work that has to be done just in figuring out the airspace part of it, much less the autonomous bit where all you do is use your smartphone and order an app, use an app and then order a flying taxi to take you from point A to point B. Another thing that has to be considered is where would these vehicles take off and land? You need to have sufficient space for them to do it. And in a lot of the prototype mock-ups that I see, it looks like it will be on the rooftops of tall buildings, but I don't think that that's necessarily practical for every destination. It might be a takeoff point, but you're not going to have a tall building to land on for every place that a person might want to go. And you are going to need clear space.
That's true. And wasn't it 6 months ago or 12 months ago, we were hearing about how big internet shopping companies like Amazon in particular was touted for this, would be delivering all of your goods using drones. Well,
they're still looking at it.
It's going to become like the who's going to own, or what commercial entities are going to be able to exploit the different strata of airspaces. That's a whole other argument.
Well, in the U.S., actually at Amazon's design, they put forward a white paper a number of years ago at a NASA conference that started to look at how do you segment airspace. And NASA has been starting to run with that in the United States and looking at how drones of different types would be able to operate at different heights. So if you had a fully autonomous drone that had a lot of sensors and safety equipment and so on, it's able to operate at, say, up to 400 feet. But if you have a drone that is manually controlled, like something that you could buy in a store today, then it would be operating at a lower level. But that still doesn't go to which drone is in an airspace at any particular point in time. You'd really need the equivalent of an air traffic control system. And in reading through some of the things that Uber has put out, it looks like that's one of the issues that they want to address, is designing this air traffic control system. And they've apparently partnered with NASA on that.
Well, we'll see how that partnership goes. I have this funny feeling it'll be well beyond 2020 before we see these vehicles in the Northern Territory. Shara, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Kate.
Shara Evans is a futurist, just pondering the future of flying taxis.